Hey everyone, it's Thursday, so that means it's time for another Tune-Up Thursday, and these are videos that we put together to help you to take care of your marriage. Now, if this is the first time you're watching one of these, we're towards the end of a series on the definition of love, and we're looking at 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verses 4 through 8, and now we finally got to verse 7. And so the Apostle Paul is talking about love, and he's telling us what love is, and we have to remember, I say this every time, we're talking about an agape type love. It's the love that God has for us, and it's a love that God has called us to, how we're supposed to love one another. Now, this is a God type love, so if we try to do it without God, we can't do it. It's something that He enables us to do, and so that's an important thing to remember because it's something we can't do on our own. And so we started off, Paul was saying a little bit about what love is. Love is patient, love is kind, and then right after that he goes into several things that love is not, or things that love does not do. It is not boastful. It's not selfish. It's not. It doesn't keep record of wrongs. He goes into this list, and then he goes back to the affirmative, and he says what love is. And where we are, we're in verse 7, and the first thing it says in verse 7 is love bears all things. Now, when you look at that verb, bears all things, what you need to know is it's in the present tense. So that means that it's continually happening. It needs to happen all the time. So these characteristics of love, and that's true of all of these, when it says that love is not something, it means love is never those things, ever those things. And when it says love is something, it means that love is always those things. And so when it says love bears all things, what I want to explain that word a little bit for you. And it comes from the Greek, and it's a term that actually was initially used to talk about a covering. Think about a roof. And so when it says it bears all things, what love does, and remember, we're looking at this in the context of marriage. So when it says that love bears all things, love covers things, think about protection. Protection from things that would come from outside, but then also things that would come from inside. And it's protection or a covering. And so when you think about marriage, what are the things that would potentially be harmful to your marriage from the outside? There's a lot of different things that we have to be careful that culture is going to want to say is right for husbands and wives, wants to say what's right for marriage. There's a lot of things that culture says that are best for your marriage, but we know under God's rule and under God's leadership in our lives, they're going to hurt our marriage. But what about the things from within? Well, the things from within, or maybe when we start buying some of those lies, or we get to be really selfish, or we become very critical, or we start to be overly negative in our marriage. And so what love does, it bears all things. So it's going to protect from those things. Think of yourself as a shield for your spouse. And I, especially as a guy, I want to point that out to the men, that you are to be the shield for your wife. And what you want to do is you want to protect her from the things from outside that might want to harm her, like expectations that others may have of her, or expectations that culture may have of her. And what you want to do is help her to become everything that God wants her to be and expects her to be. But it's also a protection from within, basically a protection from you. In other words, you have to say, listen, I don't want to do anything to hurt my spouse, to be negative of my spouse, to be critical of my spouse. I don't want to always point out faults, but I want to be encouraging. I want to be loving. And that's not just the husband's job. I say husband first because that's what husbands are. They're the leaders in the relationship, and that means they go first. They set the example. We are all equal in God's eyes, but God has said that the husband will be the leader, and so as the leader, husbands, you go first. You set the example of how to love. You set the example of how to protect. You set the example of how to forgive, how to serve, how to be humble, how to submit. And wives, equally, you want to protect your husband. Protect him from things that would be from the outside, trying to hurt your marriage, trying to divide your marriage. And then also protect him from what's within. Protect him from maybe from, as I said earlier, from you, from where you're critical, maybe overly critical, or where you're have these expectations that maybe aren't reality. You know, that they're expectations that no spouse could ever live up to. So one of the things that love always does, love always bears all things, and as Paul said, it continually does this. We continually act as a roof, as a shield, as a covering over our spouses, protecting them from things that are outside seeking to come in and things from within, and we want to get rid of those things. So think about that. Maybe have this conversation with your spouse. What are the things that are outside of us, outside of our marriage, that may be competing for our time, competing for our attention, competing for our hearts? And then say, what are the things in us, within, that might be doing those very same things, taking away from our intimacy, taking away from our unity, taking away from our togetherness, taking away from us being a team. One of the hashtags that I use in all of our family pictures that we post on social media, I always use the hashtag Team Smith. Smith's my last name. And I encourage you to think of yourself and your spouse as a team. Because when you're on the same team, guess what? You have the same goal. You're working towards winning the prize. It's not every man for himself or every woman for himself, but we're a team. And so I encourage you, maybe you can start doing this in some of your photos and some of your posts, where you're posting about your husband, posting about your wife, posting about your family, and just put team, whatever your last name is, just as a simple reminder to yourself that we're together and we want to cover each other. We want to bear all things. All right? Do me a favor, like this video, share this video, and as always, please, please, please take care of your marriage.